Welcome back. I'm Helen Madsmith, and I've got two birds fighting outside. Perhaps that's fitting of this video. But I wanted to speak with you. I wanted to converse with you about something I have long contemplated, never really been able to put into words adequately. Is about there not being any such thing as a happily ever after, or even a perfect life, or a utopia for that matter. Hopefully my audio is not blown out. And so generally in life, there are struggles. There's always going to be something to work against or work towards. And so this idea of a perfect, fulfilled life doesn't exist. And I'm going to try my best to put it into a way that is understandable and not weird and convoluted. So generally, when we think about life, especially in politics, we're always working towards some kind of perfection. And this idea kind of began to formulate in my mind years ago with one of the Batman films that involved the Joker. And if you remember, it was the film with Batman battling the Joker, and there were two fairies fleeing across the canal or the channel. And there was a bomb on one of the barges, or one of the ferries, one containing prisoners and the other containing civilians. And it was the responsibility was placed on Batman to save one of them. If you remember that scene, you'll know which one I'm talking about. And that the conflict between Batman and the Joker, as the Joker's hanging upside down from a high position, the Batman and the Joker were having a conversation about, what would you do without me, Batman? And this began to formulate an idea in my mind, considering that without the Joker, the Batman wouldn't exist. The Joker had a point. And so this also can be attributed to literary conflict. This is what that is. But also, in our daily life as human beings, the way we experience the world is similar. Because literary writings are representations of how we see and view and experience the world. And so when we begin to discuss literary conflict, we have this idea of, in literature, conflict is a literary element that involves a struggle between two opposing forces, usually a protagonist and an antagonist. And there are many different versions of this, internal and external, which is mind versus body, mind versus mind, mind versus reality, and conflict with nature, another person, or society. And considering this aspect, that these are simply representations of how we experience the world and view it, and such as yin and yang. But in a deeper perspective is that a perfect existence is, it's not a reality for us in this world. That there is no happily ever after. There is no riding off into the sunset. And there is no happily ever after. There's no from once upon a time we fix the problem and then forever after we're living in bliss. And I wanted to ask you about this. Have you ever read a book that contained no conflict? Have you ever read a book that had no problem to solve? You probably haven't. Even history books are tackling the conflict between the reader's understanding of the world and giving an accurate representation of what happened. Okay, you're ignorant of what happened in the past. Let us update you and give you an accurate representation. Even that tackles that conflict within the reader's mind. And so this idea can also be attributed to our real life. Because if you think about it, a perfect life without conflict, without struggle, it not only doesn't exist, but if it were to exist, it would be boring, for lack of a better word, and quite unfulfilling, to be honest. We would not have any fulfillment because the 100% happiness baseline would become the net zero that is, we're just existing. There would be, if there were no conflict to tackle and deal with in life, we would have no purpose. We would have generally no fulfillment, no growth. And so considering this idea, I want to also take it into politics. When we look at our political environment and this idea that we can cultivate and grow a utopia, in historical context, even in this idea of utopia, that idea has generated more and different conflict. That there's always struggle. And in the utopia, what's happened is that the conflict is redirected to other people who are not down with the utopia. And so it just makes the conflict different. And to even begin to incorporate Carl Jung's The Shadow, or I think it's Dostoevsky. I'm mistaken. But there's the idea of the shadow, that even in internal conflict, that there are darker parts of yourself to tackle and struggle with on a daily basis. You're never going to be a perfect human being. And inherently, you're never really going to experience a perfect life. So understanding this idea behind it, we can begin to understand that there will never be a perfect political environment or a perfect world to live in. That these literary devices are essentially a representation of how we experience the world around us. And I believe this is an important thing because, in truth, what begins to take place is when we realize that without this daily struggle, there is no flavor to life. And it's kind of a fallacy. We're lying to ourselves when we, not to say we shouldn't enjoy novels and writings about once upon a time, in between there's a story, and then boom, happily ever after. Not to say that's not enjoyable, but it's a lie if we take that into the real world and say, if this one problem didn't exist, I would be living happily ever after. It's not reality. Quitting your 9 to 5, getting a divorce, adopting a child, getting your nose pierced, having another tattoo, if I just had one more beer, if I could just have a car, if I was just making more money, if my family was treating me better, if I, on and on, etc. You can list out a plethora of things that you might believe, if this one thing were different, I'd be living into perpetuity, into happiness. No. And in truth, without that single conflict, without one thing, there's always going to be something that you're going to focus on and say, this could be better, this could be different, this could be easier. you'll lose the flavor of life without that. If you had an abundance of everything that you ever needed, what would you live for? What would be the purpose of your existence? Because without it, you simply would be existing. So that thought, I wanted to broach this topic and get your ideas. What do you think a perfect existence would look like? Because I want to challenge you to think about what exactly a perfect existence would look like. Because even in that perfection, you would still have the conflict of there's no issue or problem to deal with, and that my life is simply the same thing every day. Waking up, being happy, waking up, having everything. Why should I do anything if the world and life is perfect? What does that look like? And are you able to conceptualize what that looks like? Because I would pose the idea that you're incapable of doing that. And I don't believe it's because we've written all of our stories based on conflict. I would pose that life does not exist without conflict or struggle, and our writings represent that. I don't think you can conceptualize a perfect utopia. I don't believe you can conceptualize a perfect life, because it doesn't exist. And even if this idea that you bring to anyone's attention, this is what a perfect life looks like, you would, if you dig a little bit deeper, you would find that even that idea that you can come up with would generate another or different conflict. And you would have another struggle and another problem to deal with. I would like to hear what you think regarding this topic. I'd like to challenge you. What does a perfect life with no conflict actually look like? Because I don't think you can. Once again, I'm Helen Madsmith, and this is just, I want to give you some thoughts. I want to give you some ideas to really tackle and battle with and begin to look at the world a little differently, especially when it comes to politics and social dynamics. Give me your thoughts. Like this video, don't like this video. Give me a subscribe, don't. Comment down below. But I don't believe that a happily ever after even exists. Share with me and everyone else your thoughts below, if you will. And once again, thank you for viewing. Helen Madsmith. Have a great day.